All right. A number of things I want to address here, and I know that I'm seeing a lot of people leaving, so you're not going to hear the end of it. So hopefully you'll get the recordings, and we'll listen in a little bit later on. There were some things that Shabir said that I really want to correct because they really do not represent a biblical viewpoint of Christianity at all. For example, he quotes from the Apostle Paul, and I really feel for Shabir as far as the education he's received on Paul. I really wish that he had an opportunity to study with some people who were at least semi-friendly toward the Apostle Paul, would allow him to at least begin to define his own terms. For example, he quotes the text where the Apostle Paul says that the law that was against us was nailed to the cross. It's been done away with. And then he says that means for Paul, the entire Old Testament law has been abolished. Of course that's not the case. Paul recognizes the law is good, the law is just, the law is righteous. The law has a role in the life of the Christian because it reveals to us what is good and proper in the sight of our God. And it is vitally important in that way. He says that even by our faith, we establish the law in Romans chapter 3. So it's just a complete misrepresentation of Paul to say that the Old Testament law was simply done away with. It's done away with in the sense that any Jew who was misusing it as if he thought that was the means of approaching to God, that is not the way to approach God, that's true. But the right use of the law is what Paul is all about. And so that is, again, simply allowing Paul to speak. Unfortunately, what happens is many of the sources that Shabir uses will not even allow all of Paul to speak. They'll cut Paul up, as he said in Ephesians, well, maybe it was one of his disciples or something like that. They won't even allow Paul to be the author of all the epistles. And again, not because there's any solid evidence of that, or that could survive meaningful cross-examination, but because scholars like to come up with theories. And I really think there is a fundamental difference in the way that I approach the Quran. There's all sorts of theories about the Quran. There are theories about the Quran having a major revision in 705 AD, and we don't know who did it, and there are things inserted at that point in time. There's all sorts of theories like that. But I'm not going to even raise those issues unless I can actually provide evidence, documentary evidence that would prove those things. So again, we need to use equal scales. And so Paul does not say the Old Testament law is all abolished. And then he said, you have to do good deeds or you'll lose your salvation. I do my good deeds because I have my salvation. The certainty of my salvation is found in Jesus Christ, not myself. And if I don't do, quote unquote, do good deeds, and I deny Christ, and I do not continue in the Christian faith, as it says in 1 John, they went out from us, so it might be demonstrated they were not truly of us. Jesus himself said in John chapter 6, he'd come down of heaven to do his Father's will, and the will of the Father for him was that he lose none of those that were given to him. And let me tell you something to you Muslims who are still here. For me as a Christian, as I deal with the difficult issues of life, as I deal with the passing of parents, the passing of friends, the tragedies of cancer and things like that we all have to deal with in our lives. The foundation that gives me joy, the foundation that gives me peace, is a recognition that my salvation is not dependent upon my working up inside myself the ability to do the good deeds that someday are going to please my God. The reason that I have peace with God, Romans 5:1 says, therefore having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's true shalom. You know what shalom is. You have a very related term in your Arabic language. And you know that true shalom is not merely a ceasefire. True shalom is a wellness of relationship. And if my relationship with God could be broken tonight by something that I would do, that's not shalom. The reason I have peace with God is because the righteousness that I have comes from someone else. All that law that was against me, that condemned me justly for my sins, was nailed to the cross of Calvary. That's the only way we can have peace with God. That's why these things are so important. That's why I have to try to bring correction to the misrepresentations of Paul's theology. He's being taken grossly out of context. He's been accused of taking Old Testament texts out of context. We were not told which ones. I would be happy to defend those. But what's really going on is it's Paul that's being taken out of context. And as a result, the rest of the New Testament is not allowed to have its say either. The reality is that when you allow the New Testament to speak for itself, when you use equal weights, what you discover is not the idea that the law has been thrown out. It's not that, well, I have to do good works to maintain my salvation. The basis of my salvation is the finished work of Jesus Christ and Him alone. It was just said, for example, and again, one of my primary areas of study is the textual criticism of the New Testament. And Shabir was making reference to the fact that there's a textual variant in regards to the Lord's Supper. What I just have to reject in Shabir's representation of Luke is that because there's a single textual variant, that means Luke was not writing his entire book focused upon the sacrifice of Christ, and he was not writing that book within the milieu of the Christian church, which was teaching all of these things. The reality is that Luke, and especially if Luke is written as late as Shabir would like to push it, is written within a context that does not require that textual variant to be there to recognize Luke is talking to us about the finished work of Christ. It's right there. Leave it in its context and realize, how does Luke finish his book? He finishes his book with Jesus walking on the road to Emmaus after his resurrection with 2 disciples, and he rebukes them saying, did you not realize that the scriptures from Moses all the way through the prophets were testifying of me? And he rebukes them for being little in their faith. And so if that's where he is concluding that Jesus has to then open their minds to understand the scriptures, what is the real purpose of Luke? And I just want to ask all of you a question. Why should we take an interpretation of a book that ignores the author's own conclusions rather than allowing him to speak for itself? That's not how we should be doing this interpretation. I still don't understand why it is. I mean, I could make a pretty strong argument, to be perfectly honest with you, from the history of Islam, that the accusation of Tarif al-Nas, the corruption of the actual text, was not the best and earliest. Tarif al-Mana was the original accusation. I think I can make a pretty strong argument from the Quran itself, that which is sent down by God, that which is Natsal, sent down by God, cannot be changed. And since Surah 3:3 says the Torah and the Gospel is sent down, you have to ask yourself the question, if those things could be perverted, then why couldn't the Quran? Well, the promise is there, but there's also texts in the Quran that talk about the fact, bring forth something like both the Quran and the Torah. And yet you say the Torah has been corrupted, and yet we know exactly what the Torah was 700 years before Muhammad came along. There are so many of these issues that unfortunately in these brief debates we can't get into. But what I hope these debates do allow you to do is to give consideration to them. And I honestly believe that if you're still here this evening and you're still listening at this point in time, that you have an obligation before God, whether you're a Muslim or a Christian, to follow up with what you've heard this evening. In fact, I think the worst thing you could do would be to walk out of this place tonight and immediately allow your mind to go wandering off to other things, to just put these things on a back burner and to stop thinking about them. Christians, you need to know why Shabir Ali is wrong to embrace the methodology he does that atomizes the text of the New Testament and destroys its textual reliability and allows you to just take everything out of context. You need to know why that's wrong. There are excellent, awesomely scholarly books that absolutely refute that form of scholarship. They really do. They're not the most popular ones, but I can guarantee you one thing, those liberals don't like to debate people like me. And if you want to see how well they do, watch the debates that I've done with people like John Dominic Crossan or Bart Ehrman or people like that. And you'll discover that when you get them down to where you can actually ask questions, there are solid answers to all of that kind of radical skepticism. But to Muslims, I say to you, the people of the book are saying to you, listen to what we say. We read our scriptures. In your Quran, Muhammad is told, if you doubt, ask the people of the scriptures. Now, we're not sure what he's supposed to be doubting about. Some people think it's whether he was prophesied in the scriptures, so on and so forth. But you are supposed to ask us. And unfortunately, I don't find a lot of interest amongst a lot of Muslims to hear the other side and then go back and say, why have I accepted this? Do you have a solid foundation? And here's the big question, are you being consistent? If you're not being consistent, what does that say to you? Don't leave this place this evening and say, well, I had a really interesting time at mosque tonight. It's the first time that's ever happened. Don't leave here with just that. Please, whatever you do, take the time to consider these things. Listen to both sides, weigh them fairly, weigh them evenly. And when you do so, I think that you'll find that the message of sin and salvation from Genesis to Revelation is a beautiful tapestry of consistent message that brings peace to those who bow the knee to Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.